Okay, first of all, I know the history behind the WNBA. I know that both of those cities have had teams before, and they got us where we're at, so I'm thankful for that.
Nobody saw it coming. The most recognizable name in basketball had just been handed the most jaw-dropping rejection of her entire career. But here's the twist. What if that gut punch, that very public humiliation, turned out to be the single most transformative thing that could have ever happened to her? What if the announcement engineered to put Caitlin Clark in her place wound up placing a crown on her head instead? The sports universe was electric with anticipation. The Team USA Olympic basketball roster was moments away from being revealed, and the consensus was universal. Caitlin Clark, the most celebrated and commercially powerful player on the planet, was a certainty. This was the woman who had single-handedly obliterated viewership records and flooded the sport with millions of brand-new devotees. She wasn't just expected to make the team, she was the team, in every sense that mattered. The idea of her not being included was simply inconceivable, a foregone conclusion so obvious it barely warranted discussion. Then the grenade went off. Her name was nowhere on the list. The decision detonated like a shockwave, rippling from the sports desk straight into mainstream headlines. The committee's official justification, insufficient experience within the senior national team pool, landed like a hollow excuse, tissue paper thin and universally dismissed. Here was the most electrifying talent in a generation. The one human being who could single-handedly guarantee that Olympic basketball would be unmissable television. And they told her to stay home. The internet didn't just react, it erupted. A volcanic outpouring of disbelief and fury that consumed every platform and every conversation. The decision felt like a calculated insult, a deliberate signal from the entrenched establishment that her revolution would have to wait its turn. It was indefensible on a business level and deeply suspect on a basketball one. This wasn't merely about chasing gold medals. It was about expanding a sport, and they had just benched their single most valuable weapon. But as the world scrambled to process the mayhem, one voice cut through the pandemonium with the force of a freight train, and it arrived from the last place anyone anticipated. This wasn't simply a roster call. It was a declaration of war, and a formidable new force was about to step onto the battlefield, permanently reshaping the trajectories of everyone in its path. While analysts and fans were still dissecting the fallout, Phoenix Mercury guard Sophie Cunningham snatched the microphone and ignited a bonfire. She didn't merely push back against the decision, she incinerated it. In a raw, unfiltered verbal assault that immediately seized national attention, she branded the choice to exclude Clark as outright revolting. She dismantled the committee's reasoning piece by piece, exposing its glaring contradictions and intellectual bankruptcy. Cunningham then drove home, the argument the entire sports world was dancing around. This wasn't a basketball conversation. It was a financial catastrophe. Caitlin Clark was a living, breathing economic engine for women's basketball, and sidelining her from the Olympics wasn't a strategic snub. It was a colossal act of institutional self-destruction, a squandered opportunity of historic magnitude. Cunningham delivered her broadside with a ferocity that felt viscerally personal, giving voice to the tidal wave of anger and bewilderment crashing through millions of fans. She wasn't simply going to bat for a colleague, she was throwing a thunderbolt at the entire power structure of the WNBA and USA basketball. Her explosion went viral at warp speed, instantly anointing her as the de facto commander of the resistance. While every other player in the league was threading needles with diplomatically sanitized responses, Cunningham kicked the door clean off its hinges. It was her defining career moment, the instant she shed her identity as just another player and emerged as a commanding voice, a genuine power broker in the sports media ecosystem. She was no longer simply an athlete. She was a kingmaker, or more precisely, a queen's fiercest defender, and her cultural influence was about to launch into the stratosphere in ways nobody could have scripted. So, why would Sophie Cunningham willingly absorb the potential wrath of the league's veterans and power brokers to so passionately shield a rookie? Because the answer exposes a masterfully calculated career maneuver years in the making. Cunningham had been methodically cultivating her media footprint, most notably through her podcast. But this firestorm was the perfect convergence of circumstance, a once-in-a-career opening she had been sharpening herself to seize. She identified the vacuum of leadership in the narrative, recognized a story that had the entire nation riveted, and dove in headfirst without a moment's hesitation. By planting her flag as Clark's loudest and most relentless champion, she catapulted her own brand to a national stage overnight. She wasn't background noise anymore. She was a central protagonist in the defining sports story of the year, a savvy operator who understood that in the modern sports landscape, a microphone can carry just as much power as a jump shot. Her social media presence detonated. Her podcast downloads went through the stratosphere, Her name started appearing across ESPN, Fox Sports, and every major outlet, not for her on-court play, but for her unapologetic perspective. She became the unofficial spokesperson for every fan who felt the Olympic Committee had made a tone-deaf, era-missing blunder of monumental proportions. She wasn't just playing the game anymore. She was rewriting its very rulebook. The committee's stated rationale was inexperience, but behind closed doors, the undercurrents told a far darker and more complicated story. Whispers swirled with growing urgency, and they all pointed to the same source: the internal politics and deeply rooted resentments festering among the league's veteran core. The most combustible theory was devastatingly straightforward: raw, unfiltered jealousy. Clark's ascent had been nothing short of seismic. She didn't arrive in the WNBA as a wide-eyed rookie politely requesting a seat at the table. She materialized as a full-blown superstar who brought her own table, her own cameras, her own endorsement empire, and sold out arenas along with it. For players who had been grinding through the league for years, some for over a decade with a fraction of the recognition, that reportedly stung in ways that ran bone deep. Beyond the jealousy, legitimate anxieties circulated that Clark's gravitational star power would transform Team USA into something resembling a traveling circus, pulling focus away from the singular mission of capturing gold. There was a tangible, barely concealed dread that she would eclipse the game's legends players like Diana Taurasi on what was almost certainly their final Olympic chapter. The spotlight would inevitably swing toward the rookie phenom and away from their storied, swan song farewell. It was a collision of legacies the selection committee apparently calculated was not worth the risk. These weren't baseless hallway rumors. They were substantiated by on-court conduct and the pointed passive-aggressive remarks scattered across the season like breadcrumbs. The decision wasn't purely about basketball merit, it was about fortifying the established pecking order and shielding a fragile team chemistry they feared Clark would fracture. She was perceived as a disruptive agent, and the system moved to neutralize her, banking on preserving the status quo. But this miscalculation, this attempt to manage the narrative and barricade the old guard's territory, was about to unravel in the most catastrophic fashion imaginable and detonate a firestorm they had absolutely no capacity to contain. And the Olympic snub didn't exist in isolation. It was the political apex of a physical campaign that had been waged against Clark from the moment she set foot on a WNBA court. Opposing teams weren't simply competing against the Indiana Fever. They were sending a message to its rookie phenomenon, a message etched in bruises and flagrant contact. The aggression was visceral, jarring, and at times outright shocking. The most notorious flashpoint was the flagrant foul from Chicago Sky's Chennedy Carter, a deliberate hip check that sent Clark crashing to the floor before a dead ball, accompanied by muttered insults that made the intent unmistakable. The play was universally condemned as a cheap shot, an act of naked aggression fueled by frustration and contempt. But it wasn't an isolated incident, not even remotely. Clark absorbed relentless physical punishment throughout the season, blindsided by vicious screens, shoved off cuts, hammered on drives in ways that routinely crossed the boundary from tough basketball into deliberate targeting. Veterans cloaked their aggression in the language of toughening up a rookie, but the subtext was transparent. They were trying to physically intimidate the young woman who was vacuuming up every headline and every endorsement deal in the room. The Olympic exclusion was simply the institutionalized sequel to the on-court harassment campaign. When physical intimidation failed to break her, the establishment reached for its bluntest institutional tool and denied her the world's grandest stage. But while the world raged and Cunningham roared, Caitlin Clark executed the most devastating move available to her. She went almost completely silent. Rather than firing back, airing grievances, or pouring fuel onto the inferno surrounding her, she responded with a composure and poise that felt almost eerie in its steadiness. When the cameras and microphones found her, she spoke quietly about channeling the disappointment as fuel and offered nothing but genuine support for her teammates who had made the roster. It read, to the casual observer, like restraint. In reality, it was a masterstroke of strategic brilliance. Her silence was thunderous. By seizing the high ground, she freed the media, the fans, and powerful advocates like Cunningham to wage the battle in her name, amplifying her victimhood while she remained untouchable and unblemished. She became a sympathetic icon, the gifted young star, wronged by a broken and self-serving system which transformed her already devoted fan base into something approaching a righteous crusade. While her detractors were drowning in the controversy they had manufactured, Clark was on the hardwood, making history in plain sight. She answered the snub with a torrent of record-shattering performances, drilling impossible 3-0, foot bombs, rewriting the rookie record books for points and assists, and pulling playoff-caliber crowds into every arena she visited across the league. Night after night, she delivered an unmistakable silent thesis to the Olympic Committee, and the entire watching world here is precisely what you chose to forfeit. Her composed, measured response, fused with her breathtaking on-court dominance, produced the ultimate strategic checkmate. She dismantled no one. She needed to because her own ascendance was constructing something infinitely more powerful and permanent than an Olympic gold medal. She was crystallizing into a global icon, forged and tempered in the furnace of controversy. The decision to leave Caitlin Clark off the Olympic roster will almost certainly be cataloged as one of the most colossal business miscalculations in the modern history of professional sports. A textbook case study in how catastrophically wrong things go when institutional politics overrides commercial logic. The numbers are unsparing, and they paint a portrait of squandered opportunity on a staggering scale. Clark's games, stretching back through college and now into the WNBA, generated viewership figures previously considered fantasy for women's sports. Her NCAA championship game outperformed both the World Series and the NBA Finals in the ratings. Her WNBA debut on ESPN obliterated prior viewership benchmarks by margins measured in the hundreds of percent. She was a one-woman media conglomerate, a transcendent, category-defying superstar whose singular power was converting casual, passing observers into rabid, devoted fans, the very lifeblood of any league with serious aspirations of growth. By leaving her stateside, Team USA Basketball and NBC, the official Olympic broadcast partner, voluntarily surrendered a golden goose of almost incomprehensible value. The potential for record-smashing ratings in Paris, with Clark at the center of the global stage, was astronomical. Without her, viewership settled for a pale shadow of what might have been. The hemorrhage extended far beyond ratings into merchandise revenue, sponsorship valuations, and global media footprint. Her jersey number 22 became the top-selling piece of athletic apparel for any player across any professional sport the moment it was made available. Her presence in Paris alone would have triggered a marketing delirium, magnetizing global brands and generating sponsorship conversations that would have reverberated for years. Instead, the committee bowed to tradition and the petty comfort of internal politics, choosing the harmony of the locker room over a billion-dollar catalyst for the sport's worldwide expansion. They weren't just picking 12 players for a basketball team. They were declining a winning lottery ticket that could have bankrolled women's basketball's global emergence for the next decade. In the end, the coordinated effort to arrest Caitlin Clark's rise and remind her of her place in the hierarchy detonated in the most spectacular reversal imaginable. The Olympic exclusion engineered to deflate the rookie and reaffirm the old guard's dominion achieved the precise opposite of every intention behind it. It metamorphosed Clark from a basketball prodigy into a cultural martyr, galvanizing her enormous following into a unified, impassioned movement and elevating her profile to heights that simply could not have been manufactured. Her gracious, dignified silence only deepened the effect, rendering her critics appear petty, insecure, and hopelessly disconnected from the pulse of the modern fan. Simultaneously, the chaos engineered a platform for bold, unafraid voices like Sophie Cunningham to execute their own landmark career pivots. Cunningham seized the cultural moment with both hands, reinventing herself from a solid, dependable role player into a national media personality, and a genuine power advocate, permanently redirecting her influence and trajectory within the sport she loves. The establishment attempted to slam shut the door on a new era. Instead, all they managed to do was hand its most luminous star the keys to the entire kingdom. They tried to postpone her coronation. They accidentally triggered it. And when we look back on this moment from the other side of history, this unbelievable announcement will not be remembered as the moment Caitlin Clark was rejected. It will be remembered as the moment a revolution in women's sports became utterly, undeniably inevitable proof that sometimes the most defining victory of a career is born not from triumph, but from a shocking and very public defeat.